Um, yeah, obviously I'm not Christina, so I'm glad you figured out that the talk switched. I haven't been feeling great, so I'm trying to get as much energy for this talk as possible and then go collapse somewhere. My talk is titled The Future of Development, and we're just going to be talking about the dev process. So if you were in the previous talk, Dr. Nick's, coincidentally, we didn't talk about it. His was titled The Future of Deployment, and he talked about production systems. I'm going to talk completely about the developer process, and that just kind of worked out. So I'm Mitchell Hashimoto. I go by Mitchell H pretty much anywhere on the internet that matters. And if you don't know me, I don't know, you might know I made something called Vagrant. So if you use Vagrant or have heard of it, then that's my project. And if you don't know what it is, then you should learn about it because it's pretty cool. If you don't know about it, though, you don't need to know about it for this talk. I work for a company that has this logo. We'll talk about that a little bit later, though. You definitely don't know what this is. But today we're going to talk about, like I said, how we work. And we're going to talk about, in the context of web applications, but the ideas are pretty applicable to other things, too. And we're going to kind of talk about how we worked yesterday, as in the past, how we work today, or how I hope people work today, and then think about the future and what we could do to work more effectively in the future and be happier developers, but also have better production systems too. So Dr. Nick said, you could optimize for production systems, but then your developer experience gets shittier, which is kind of true, but thinking about it and how we can make both the best possible. So I'm going to start by going backwards and going 2000, 2010, and how we developed during this time period. And actually, we probably developed this way before 2000, but I started working in the year 2000, so we'll just start with that. And it's a nice 10-year decade to talk about. So in the year 2000, the overwhelming pattern of working was to install everything locally. You would get everything you needed to work, and you would install it on your own machine, and you would work on your machine. And during this time, at least in the early mid-2000s, tools like XAMPP or MAMP were like the way you did things. And I don't know how many people here know what they are, but these were like on XAMPP, or I don't know how to pronounce it. I always pronounce that. But it's a Windows installer that installed Apache, MySQL, PHP, and Perl. And MAMP was the same thing, but on Mac. And this was just the way everyone I knew worked in the early 2000s. And it makes a lot of sense, actually. This whole idea is not a bad choice for PHP and MySQL, because in the early 2000s, our web applications were mostly just like PHP or Perl and a database, and there wasn't a whole lot of other moving parts, except in very, very large websites. So for most websites, this is all it was, and PHP runs pretty much the same everywhere, and MySQL, as long as you have that, you're speaking SQL, runs pretty much the same everywhere. So just installing it on your computer, I think, for this time period was the best choice, and it was really good. But the problem is our technologies that we use changed. So PHP and MySQL, I think, were the most prevalent things in 2000, 2005, and PHP is still super widely used all over the place, and MySQL too. But the technologies started changing in the latter half of the decade. So we started seeing, today we have this is just a tiny list, but we have a ton of things. We started, Apache and mod PHP used to just be how you did things. And then other languages came along, like Ruby and Rails and Python and Django. They always existed, but they grew in popularity. And I remember when I first started getting into Rails and Ruby, I got into Ruby through Rails. I had all these RB files, and I couldn't figure out how to get them to run. Like I was FTPing them to a server, and I was like refreshing, and they were just rendering as text, and I couldn't figure it out. Because I was used to the way PHP worked, and it was totally different. And so we started having to deal with multiple web servers, like Apache and Nginx, dealing with the PHP, executes on every request, but Rails started, it started with fast CGI, and then we started getting into app servers like Unicorn and Mongrel, and Thin and stuff like that. And then we started using different databases. Now there's 10 databases out there that are perfectly valid use cases. They have perfectly valid use cases. Like we all probably use Redis at some point for something. SQL's still useful in like 99% of scenarios. Things like Cassandra have a place. They're all valid choices one time or another. And then I can't think of any website anymore that doesn't have a task queue either, or queue workers. So everything has background workers. And before, it was pretty rare you would use crons or something. So things got a lot more complicated, and it happened really fast. It happened, in the latter part of the 2000s, and the problem is that all this technology really changed out from under us, but our dev process didn't change at all. We were still, when I started using Rails and up to the end of the decade, we're still trying to just install all this stuff on our own computers, and we're still trying to install, I don't even know, like Beanstalk D or whatever the task queues were popular back then. Just install it on our own machines, and it just didn't work anymore because it's not trivial to get all this stuff installed locally. We had MAMP and we had XAMPP to set up Apache and MySQL, and it was really easy. There's really nothing like that anymore to set up everything we need because there's so many different options out there. If there was like a MAMP today that had all our dev tools, it'd be like 10 gigs of just like crap that got thrown on your machine. And it's more complicated because PHP, we didn't care about what version things were. As long as it was like PHP like 4 then or something, it worked. And we didn't care what version of MySQL there was really. As long as it was like 3 something, it probably worked. But today, things are moving so quickly that versions really matter. They change really quickly, and the configuration is really important. With PHP and MySQL on your own dev machine, you generally didn't care even how it was configured because it just ran. So not only is it non-trivial to get everything installed locally, it's getting even more complicated to get things configured properly because, as I said, PHP MySQL just work kind of out of the box. But other things require individual configuration nowadays, and that gets harder, especially LOL if you have multiple projects, because getting multiple projects working with PHP MySQL easy because MySQL has databases, PHP doesn't care that you just have virtual hosts. But getting multiple projects working with Redis instances or task queues, stuff like that, starts to become a nightmare. And then you start dealing with multiple versions again, and it just gets really hard. And so this install locally thing didn't keep up with the technologies that were changing. But to be fair, there are benefits to this paradigm. The most prevalent is there's a super easy workflow, which is you save a file and you reload the web page, and you see it. With PHP, you would just have it in a text editor, save it, refresh, and it would be there. With Rails and stuff, we have things that watch for code changes and reload it. So you get this really, really nice, I save a file, I instantly reload, and I see my change right away. And that's nice. You get to use your own tools, so your own editor, your own debugger, anything you want pretty much, and you're probably very efficient with whatever tools you choose to use, so you work more efficiently, get things done more quickly, and that's really nice. And your computer's fast. So generally, actually, your dev computer is probably faster than some of the servers you have in production. So things just run fast, and that's really nice for development too, because you could just, again, refresh and everything runs, and it's quick, and it's nice. So there are benefits. But I would argue that there's actually more cons to the whole process. Like I said, it's horrendously difficult to get it going. It starts out easy. Like if you're just doing Rails and MySQL, getting those two things installed is pretty easy. Then you add in different services you need and more backend systems, and it gets more complicated. Then you throw in configuration, it gets even more complicated. And I would say that just by being here, the people in this crowd are generally like more tech savvy and able to figure things out if they go wrong. But the idea of giving like a junior developer the task of installing all this stuff on his or her laptop to get going is like kind of frightening, especially because the past few years I've been like a full-time ops person, and there's no way that they're going to get it right. Like there's no way they're going to configure it correct. So that's pretty bad. You get these works on my computer bugs, and this is mostly due to misconfiguration. So someone might be using SQLite in development because this junior developer, you tell some junior developer to set up Postgres, they install it really easily, then they can never figure out how to make authentication work. And so they're like, F it. I'm just going to use SQLite because it works. And then they use some feature that doesn't translate directly to Postgres, and then hopefully like CI or staging catches it, but they always trickle up somehow to production too. And you get these bugs where the developer is like, I don't know, it worked on my computer. I'm sorry. And this is due mostly to this process of setting things up in a different way. It's difficult to manage multiple projects. I already mentioned this, so I don't need to explain this much further. And all of this is just very much unlike production. So again, in the early 2000s when it was just PHP MySQL, you're pretty much running like production, but on a Mac or Windows or something. But now when we have so many moving parts and so many different technologies, it's very much unlike production. And a lot of these newer tools just don't work the same on Mac, if they even compile for Mac, or Windows, or even your own Linux. So you're running in something that's not like production, and this leads to all sorts of bugs and weirdness, and we'd like to work closer to production. That's the whole point of the whole thing. So I guess in the late 2000s, I just woke up one day and was super pissed at everything because I realized that my dev process life was terrible. So I worked for a Rails dev shop, so we would have new clients every 6 to 10 weeks and make websites with Rails. And so every 6 to 10 weeks, I would see a new project, and there'd be a new version of Rails, and we'd use Redis this time instead of some other thing, and then we used a different database, and everything changed a little bit. And so I'd have to set up my computer, install everything on my computer, and then the guy, from 6 months ago comes back and asks me, could we have some maintenance done on our project? And their project doesn't even run on my computer anymore because everything's changed so much. And so I just woke up one day and was extremely angry at everything that was happening. So then, moving on to 2010 to today. So in 2010, in like January 2010, I sat down. I was in my college dorm room, and I started working on what would become Vagrant. Again, if you don't know what it is, you can go to the URL. And my idea, what I wanted to do was, the general principle was I wanted to sandbox things. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I wanted each project to have its own sandbox. And at first, I thought maybe I'd just compile things so they'd have their own like root or something. But I realized a much simpler idea was do everything the exact same as what we're doing right now, but install the things into a VM, because that just gives you sandboxing for free. And Mac doesn't have jails or containers or anything. So that was the idea, was install everything in the VM, just like we do now, but try to retain the benefits of local development as well. So quick sidebar, let's talk about a cloud real quick. So we've been talking about dev process, but I want to talk about production for just a second. So from 2000 to 2005, hosting, everyone used shared hosting or dedicated servers. VPSs existed, but they were rare. And everything was manually set up. So you would always start with a shared host, up FTP or PHP files up there, run them. Or you'd get a dedicated server or something with SSH, and you would manually install all your packages you needed. That was how things were done, because we viewed servers as these static things that existed. Then from 2006 to 2010, VPSs started coming around. Like I think SliceHost was the first like big popular one, and there was EC2 launched, and these VPSs and these fast VPS and EC2 things gave us this idea of disposability, where we stopped seeing servers as static things and started seeing them as expendable things. They're just, when we don't need them, we throw them out and we ask for a new one. And because of this, things like Puppet and Chef started gaining in popularity. Like Chef actually, I think, came out in like 2007 or 2008, but Puppet has been around, and CF Engine and configuration management in general has been around since the 90s. So they just grew in popularity because of this idea of disposability. And it's my opinion, I would argue that disposability actually defines what production is today. It's just like, it's like saying, this carpet is green. I think it's green. So this carpet is green. It just is, right? And production nowadays is disposable. It just is. So things like Heroku and EngineYard and these other things just they could have existed before this, but because this is just how we view things now, it just makes sense that they exist, that they just are. So the problem is, though, that these concepts, the concepts of automation and the concept of disposability, are still today and were completely foreign to the dev process. So we still saw our laptops as these like perfectly set up golden machines where we installed everything and it existed forever. And it's just there, and you don't uninstall these things. And so I also thought, can we bring down this concept of disposability and the idea of automation and down to dev? Because it revolutionized production. So why keep it up there? Why not bring it down? And I think that's what we did. So with Vagrant, there's a command called Vagrant-up. And this creates a virtual machine and provisions it and does networking stuff and gets you going. And then on the flip side, there's a Vagrant-destroy, and that destroys it. And so it's very much disposable. You bring them up and you throw them away. And if you mess it up, it doesn't matter because you could bring up a new one. It's disposable. You share automation, hopefully, with production. So there's lower dev-prod parity. So if you have Chef or Puppet setting up production, which is predominantly the case now, you could start using these same things with minor modifications down on development as well. And this leads to, you probably have ops people that set up Chef and Puppet, and they configure Postgres and everything. And they know how to configure these things. So why not let them deal with it, and the developers no longer need to install anything. So that junior dev doesn't care anymore he can't mess everything up by installing things on his own, messing with things he does not know about. And you leave it to the people who it's their job, and they set it up for you. Multiple projects are totally easy now because of the isolation of VMs that we just get for free. So each project could have its own VM, and you just spin it up, and that's fine. And we still retain some of the benefits of the install locally because we could use shared folders to mimic that we're editing files on our own system, and we could use networking tricks that all the hypervisors support so that we could get an IP and stuff and refresh in our own browser. And it still seems we still have that save reload workflow, and it seems like we're editing locally, but we got the benefits also of isolating things, which is nice. And after existing for almost 3 years, I'd say the Vagrant model has maybe not proven, but has been validated to be a vast improvement over prior models. So it may not be the right solution, but it's definitely going in a better direction. And I'd say it's validated because thousands of companies use it today. And I don't know how many people. I don't want to embarrass myself by asking how many people use it here, but thousands of companies use it. And this is just like the bigger ones. But this is like 0.01% of the people using Vagrant today. And because they all use it, it must be doing something in the right direction. And in addition, the workflow is praised quite a bit and copied by other tools. So a lot of people complain like VirtualBox sucks. Yeah, that's fine. But nobody complains that Vagrant-up, Vagrant-destroy. Nobody has ever complained that they don't like that model. So, and a lot of people have copied that and made it, there's like a Vagrant copy for AWS and a Vagrant copy for LXC and stuff like that. And the underlying tech changed, but the workflow, they copied it exactly. So again, it's idea validation, but doesn't mean it's perfect. So what are some of its downsides still? Vagrant-up could be slow. So running Chef and Puppet or something on every up could be pretty slow, and so that sucks. Complicated websites are hard to mirror, so we've started moving into this more service-oriented world, and service-oriented is just hard to mirror in development because there's a lot of moving pieces, and you kind of want to use separate VMs for them, but VMs are expensive, so you don't want to make a ton of them. And it just gets more complicated. Building VM still requires a ton of automation. You can't just hop into Vagrant and then have like a Rails dev machine. You still need to figure out how to install Rails and stuff like that. And so that kind of sucks. You need someone that could do that. And again, VirtualBox works, but yeah, I think we all know. So these are all problems with the tool. These are problems with Vagrant, and that's fine. But it's not a problem with the idea. The idea itself, I think, is pretty solid. I don't know. You could argue that with me after. Not now, because I need to sound right now. So, but yeah, these are problems with the tool, but not the idea. So I think we need to start thinking, though, about the future. I think what got us into this problem in the first place, the problem that I woke up one day just pissed at how I worked, was because our technology's changed. Our dev process didn't adapt. We just didn't think about it, and we were okay with the status quo. And while I think Vagrant is an improvement, or that idea is an improvement, we need to start thinking about how things are changing now. And one thing I mentioned is service-oriented architectures, but there's other things. How are things changing, and how can we think of the dev process 5 years from now? Like, Vagrant's okay now. If I didn't change anything, Vagrant is not going to be okay in 5 years. I don't think it'll be the same. So the world moves very quickly. A lot is changing. What are we going to do about it? So I'm going to mention a few things that are up and coming right now that are going to change the way we work on a day-to-day basis, and we haven't talked about how we're going to do it. PaaS is the biggest one. PaaS existed 3-5 years ago, but it wasn't a thing. It wasn't really a useful thing. Today, though, a lot more people are using it, like Heroku and Engineer and stuff. But the problems with PaaS is a lot of them advertise themselves as black boxes. You push your code there, they run them using their fancy ops knowledge, and you don't worry about scaling. They auto-scale. But you still need to work on these things. So how do you mimic these down in development? How do you push your code every time? That would get rid of the fast save reload. I mean, could you imagine like saving a text file, git pushing, waiting like 10 seconds, refreshing your browser, and then seeing your change? It's possible, but it requires internet, and it just sucks. So what can we do about all these passes? There's multiple cloud vendors now. So pretty much before there was EC2 or VPS providers. Today, there's a lot of other things. Clouds are moving into... when I say cloud, I mean like elastic computing. Elastic computing is moving into data centers with things like OpenStack. There's even providers that will give you an API to spin up dedicated hardware. They're not even virtualized anymore. So, and they're all used, actually. So before, you could pretty much be like, you used EC2. And today, there's a lot more options out there. And we need to think how development's going to work with that. There's more virtualization. So VMware parallels, they existed. But today they have APIs, and they're just more accessible all around. KVM is pretty much flushed out and super solid nowadays. People like containers a lot more than they did 5 years ago. So LXC is a lot more stable in the latest kernel. Stuff like that. Virtualization, or I know containers aren't true virtualization, but you know what I mean. Virtualization is just getting more and more widespread. How can we use this to our benefit for development? And even though the workflow, no one's complained about it, we still need to think about it. So how can we make the workflow even better? Just thoughts. So the whole point is, let's not get stuck in the past again. Let's improve with the rest of things that are happening. Let's not wake up one day and realize that we hate working the way we work every day. Let's just keep changing and trying things so that things remain awesome. So I obviously love this stuff. So I tweeted last week on Friday or something that it was my last day at my job. So I was an ops engineer for this company called Keep. And that was my last day on November 9th. And no one really knows what I'm doing yet. I haven't actually told anyone publicly. So I'm going to just tell you guys here now. So I realized that for some weird reason, I really, really care about making this dev process awesome for people. And maybe it's because I just woke up so angry one day that I have to care. But I really care. So the next thing I'm doing is starting my own company. And it's called HashiCorp. And I sat in my room for like months trying to figure out a name, and then I was like, I said, F it. All those Asian people start companies with their own names. So Mitsubishi, Toyota, screw it. So for the first time ever, I'm going to be working on Vagrant full-time. I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that I've never worked on it more than 2 or 4 hours a day. I would do my full-time job, come home, and then work on Vagrant. For the first time ever, I'm going to be working on it every day. But the real focus is making really awesome dev tools. And if Vagrant's not the right answer, then I want to do what is the right answer. But I'll be able to focus full-time on making these things awesome. And I just kind of want to show RuPy what I've been working on to be like, maybe this is making things better, maybe it's not. But by working on it now, I think we'll know much sooner and we could adapt. So obviously full-time work on Vagrant, which I think is better for anyone using it. The first thing is VMware support for Fusion Workstation and vSphere is going to be done in the next month or two, which is really awesome. And it looks and works really easily. So it's all the same, except you specify what provider you want to bring machines up with. And perhaps best of all, this is an open interface, and it's open source. So if there's a lot of Red Hat people here, and if you want it to work with libvirt and KVM, then you just hook into the interface, and you can make it work. You want to make it work with your own inventory system for your own dedicated hardware, you can make that work. So you could Vagrant up your own machines, anything. And it's really easy to do. I don't even know why I put this slide in here. It doesn't matter. But all this stuff is coming in like less than 2 months, and most of it is done already. It's committed in Git already. And for the bigger companies, I'll be doing training and support. I'm not that excited about it, but people want it, so fine. And more products. So I've worked in dev for a long time. I was an ops person. I was a full-time dev for like 8 years, and I was a full-time ops person on the complete other side for 3 years. And there's just a ton of problems that are waiting. There's a ton of things that I would just be like, why does this suck so much? And I want to work on these other things too. So being able to figure out what I do on my own, I could do that. So my vision for the future in a more abstract way, that was very concrete given the rest of this talk, but in a more abstract, my vision for the future, I want to see something like a marketplace for Vagrant boxes. So if you don't know how to install Rails, it doesn't matter, because you could be like, I need a Rails box that has Postgres in it because that's what I want to work with, and then you can start working. And I want to build something like that. Yeah, we already talked about that. Vagrant up into your production provider, so things like EC2 and stuff. I want to start seeing PaaSes provide boxes to mimic what they do. So EngineYard actually announced last week that announced EngineYard Local, which is kind of like a white-labeled Vagrant that runs EngineYard on your own machine. And I think that's totally the right direction. So I would love to see like Heroku or something integrate a Heroku Local that somehow makes Heroku work on your own machine or something like that. I don't think they're working on this. It's just a wish, but I think things like this for PaaSes are a good idea. There'll be better automated testing, because you could do things like LXC now. I think that's going to be huge. And I think it's going to become more and more important to be able to have this disposable idea with things like Mac OS X and Windows too, because especially with the rise of apps, like iOS apps and Mac apps, we need better ways to just CI and test those. And I think getting the idea of disposability is the way we're going to do it. So things are going to get better. They're going to get way, way better. But we all kind of need to think about how we want things to be better. So I hope this talk kind of helped you realize that we need to be thinking about them. Things are changing. And that's pretty much it. So I think I have like a minute for questions. So.